really complicated feelings about The Power of the Doctor, which was the final episode of Jodie Whittaker's The 13th Doctor, Mandip Gill as Yaz, and the final story of showrunner Chris Chibnall. Because, you know, these stories are an event whether, like, you like them or not. Depending on whether or not you are a massive fan of, you know, Matt Smith, his final story, The Time of the Doctor, was an epic event, and it was the passing of the guard to Peter Capaldi, and this has happened over a dozen times over the course of the series. My first regeneration story was 2005 with The Parting of the Ways, and that was basically a massive deal for me at the time, the changing of the guard, and it was before I was even really engaging with a wider fandom. That was something that I kind of had to go through alone, as a lone fan, watching my Doctor fight his final battle and transform into David Tennant. And what we're seeing now, even all these years later, it could be the same for many people who Jodie Whittaker is their Doctor facing their final battle and also regenerating into David Tennant. The more things change, the more things stay the same, it appears. But for The Power of the Doctor, I think what made it such a incredibly cathartic experience for me, like, by the end of the 90-minute runtime, not only was my bum sore, because I don't think Doctor Who episodes should ever be 90 minutes, I was incredibly moved by it. It was a special, it was 90 minutes long, and I was completely drained by the end. I did cry, and it's not necessarily because, like, I'm super attached to this era of the show. I think that there's an awful lot of redeeming elements to the Chibnall era. I've been called, and I often refer to myself as a Chibnall apologist. And there are some, of course, very low points of the era, like Arachnids in the UK, Survivors of the Flux, and some moments like, you know, the ending of Can You Hear Me, things like Kablam. There's a lot of issues that I do have with the current era. The implementation of the Fugitive Doctor, the execution of the Timeless Child arc, etc. But I still found myself being profoundly moved and affected by The Power of the Doctor. And I think what it did was that it put to words and put into media, into the medium, and the language of the show, the experience of being a Doctor Who fan going through that change. There's a lovely scene at the end of The Parting of the Ways before Eccleston regenerates into David Tennant, when he explains very calmly and lightheartedly to Rose what regeneration is. He only has like 2 minutes before he changes, and he says, Time Lords have this little trick. You know, no, they're not going to see you again with this daft old face. He's trying to make it easy for her. But it was kind of like The Power of the Doctor was like watching a 90-minute version of that scene, or specifically maybe the last 30 to 40 minutes. Because The Power of the Doctor was, I think what it did was that it made the communal experience of the passing of the torch, of the worry of seeing your Doctor go and be replaced by a new face. And what it did was that it took it away from the fans and it actually made it as part of the proper text, where you've got a story that is at its root about not getting the ending that you want. And I think the story shows its hand very cleverly with the implementation of Tegan and Ace, because not only are they the only classic series companions, sans Perry, who got an encounter with the Master, with the Cybermen and the Daleks, but they also did not get the endings with their Doctors that they wanted. With Tegan, it was, they parted on pretty poor terms, with a reluctant handshake and I can't do this, Doctor, I've got to go. And with Ace, that could even be a meta aspect to it, because they never actually got a departure on screen. Expanded media has done many things, including Sophie Aldred's book At Childhood's End, which I kind of consider to be the canonical departure. One detail that I really liked in The Power of the Doctor is that they did keep the departure between Seven and Ace deliberately vague. They just say, I'm sorry that we fell out, I didn't understand the burden you carried, and that the Doctor was okay with how they departed because he wanted to see Ace flourish and fly. But apart from that, we get the emotional context between Ace and the Doctor, but we don't get the actual specifics, and I thought that was the really best way to go for it. It means that, you know, all expanded media is possible and all expanded media is canon, and also you don't want to really bog down this 90-minute story because it is already filled to bursting. So it's about characters who do not get the fates or the endings that they wanted, and smiling through it anyway. I think the most pivotal line in The Power of the Doctor is when 13 wakes up, everybody's gone except for Yaz, and she sees her glowing hand, and she despairs and says, I need more time. I wanted more time. And then realizes that she doesn't have that time anymore, and it's all about her final moments with Yaz. And I thought that that was the pivotal line for The Power of the Doctor. That you may not get the ending that you want, you may not be thrown the cards that you want to, or be dealt the right cards in your hand, life will throw the wrong dice at you, etc. But I think if you smile through it and persevere, there's a better sunrise, there's a better tomorrow. And I think that that's the mission statement for The Power of the Doctor. You can argue that it could also be in a meta sense for Chris Chibnall, that maybe he didn't get the ending to his tenure that he wanted because of what happened with lockdowns and the pandemic drastically reimagining his vision for Series 13. For all we know, many of the details that go unexplained in The Power of the Doctor, like how Ashad came back, he was cloned, but how and why, and what does Ashad get out of this, stuff like that. Maybe we were meant to watch the Fugitive Doctor make some sort of substantial comeback in Series 13, but it never did. Maybe we were going to open up that fob watch that was left inside the TARDIS at the end of The Vanquishers. I don't know. That's between Chris Chibnall and Rassilon up above. I don't know. So you could argue it could be a meta sense that Chris Chibnall is partly lamenting the end of the tenure that he didn't get, but also acknowledging that he did, like, nobody else got to live his days. Nobody else got to leave the impact that he specifically left with those stories, with those characters specifically, and that he sees the next sunrise. And Jodie playfully goes into her next incarnation. The final words, tag, you're it. Perfect. I bloody adored it. I think that in terms of the actual full-blown story, this is the best regeneration since Christopher Eccleston. I also think that The Power of the Doctor is the best regeneration story since Bad Wolf and the Parting of the Ways. I don't think it is a stone-cold 10 out of 10 classic, but I have to acknowledge and admit that the last 30 to 40 minutes were astonishingly powerful. I think that this is a better celebration and tribute and ensemble piece than Journey's End, whilst also acknowledging and putting a hard asterisk that Journey's End did not have the additional runtime that The Power of the Doctor did. Spluff 5, what, the story was incoherent? Now, let me clarify. I think that it's a better regeneration story, like than End of Time, Time of the Doctor, Twice Upon a Time. I do think that as a 90-minute story, it does have issues. It does have problems. There are a few moments where I think that it's trying a little bit too hard to please fans. The main moment for me was when Tegan monologues to Kate Stewart about what she's been through. Even most fans do not have any of like we don't know that you're twice married and have an adopted son. Okay, that felt like a bit of a maybe trying a little bit too hard there. Now, I know people in the chat are saying, I hated it, it was bad, Mr. Titus, what are you doing? Cease, desist, stop talking, cease and desist, there's a good girl. But I also have to fully acknowledge that it did have that effect on me. And if it had that effect on me, it had it for a reason. I also think that a lot of it does come down to that last 45 minutes. But I was also kind of amazed that it did manage to keep so many cards close to its chest in the lead up to it. That regeneration scene that we've seen in the trailers of the Doctor shouting Yaz, which we now know was her swapping bodies with the Master, kind of, is halfway through the episode. That's clever. That's a good bait and switch for audiences and fans. That was very good. So The Power of the Doctor, I think you kind of have to treat, almost by necessity to be fair, as an event story akin to the Five Doctors, because that is the environment in which it has been made as a centenary celebration for the BBC and for a feature-length event that puts so much together. I think it is more akin to, say, the Five Doctors than it is the End of Time. But it had the fun spectacle, it had really effective use of cameos and returning appearances. I really, really liked what they did with the returning characters for the most part, including at the very end when absolute Chad, Ian Chesterton, played by William Russell, reprising his role at the end. And according to some keen observers, this is a tweet from S. Andre Chen on Twitter. Hey, BBC Doctor Who Guinness World Records, can we give William Russell the record he deserves for longest gap between TV appearances as the same character, since he beats the holder by 14 years. It's been 57 years, 3 months and 27 days between his last appearance on Doctor Who, in The End of the Chase, and his reprisal today. And Guinness World Records responds, we're looking into this. So William Russell might actually be getting a Guinness World Record for this. Now, people said, but he was in Big Finish. We're talking on screen. Stay on target, folks. But yeah, we last saw Ian Chesterton leave the First Doctor at the end of the chase. And William Russell, at the age of 97, returns as Ian. When I do my in-depth edited review, I am going to be fully looking at the power of the Doctor in its totality. But there is a reason why, when we look back at the end of time, over 10 years later, what almost everybody remembers from it is Campy John Sim, Timothy Dalton spitting, and the scenes with David Tennant and Bernard Cribbins. A lot of the other stuff and the fluff either gets hand-waved away or forgotten about. The stuff that, stands the test of time. And I think there's a lot of stuff in The Power of the Doctor that will stand the test of time. But when we talk about the story in its totality, there are a few Chibnallisms that make it a little bit incoherent and sloppy. For example, I do not have a clue why he did the 15 paintings, the 13 seismologists. It just feels like Chibnall doing a Chibnall and saying, big text on the screen, let's have all these disparate threads and connect them together. When Ace was in that museum cafe and was talking to Tegan on the phone and was like, there's 15 paintings all disappear within the span of a few months and 13 slides, this is a plot teaser. This is what you read on the back of a Blu-ray. This is not dialogue. This is stuff that keeps on happening. And I don't even know why the seismologists are there, because the Daleks are, making volcanoes erupt. I don't think that disappearing seismologists are going to be factoring into the Daleks' plan. I also acknowledge that while the Rasputin Master was absolutely incredible, Sacha Dhawan plays the hell out of it, and I also think that the Ra-Ra Rasputin set piece, the dance, that they actually did, is some of the best TV that I've seen in 2022. He didn't need to be there as Rasputin. I think that's a garnish. From what I can tell, watching the story twice, I think he did that so he could have access to that rich guy's house, so he could turn it into that conversion place, that trap for the Doctor. I'm guessing that's honestly, with the exception of it being a flex on the Master's part, that's the only logistical reason. At one point, the 13th Doctor says to him, so all of this was a diversion, and the Master chides her and says, no, not a diversion, very important. Yeah, the Tsar, rich guy. But then he never explains why it was very important for him to do what he did. I don't know why that cyber-converted planet, that moon in the sky, needs to be in 1916. I understand why he needs the planet, because forced regeneration, he's ransacked Gallifrey, he'll have that technology. But forced regeneration into a specific incarnation and a body swap, I buy that as him needing additional resources. That checks out for me in terms of technobabble sci-fi. That checks out. But it also does once again lead to the 13th Doctor being chained up or imprisoned and having a lot of exposition thrown at her. We have seen this an awful lot in Flux. We saw this at the end of Series 12. Chibnall is kind of falling back into these old habits, and it does a disservice to this incarnation of the Doctor. Even though Jodie Whittaker has, compared to many of her predecessors, like Matt Smith, like David Tennant, she may not have had as much screen time as many of her predecessors, but I think she has spent a disproportionate amount of time in captivity, and for the first female Doctor, that's not a very good look. However, when the Master does dance to Ra Ra Rasputin, does pelvic thrusts to Russia's greatest love machine, and the Cybermaster and the Dalek look at each other with the awkward glance, it's magic television. This is the stuff I'm talking about, where the heart overpowers the head. Yeah, there's some really lovely callbacks. I mentioned it earlier. I think Yaz carrying the 13th Doctor away in what could be a parallel to the Caves of Androzani. I loved it. But we know this is silly and we don't care. I do appreciate the audacious... I do appreciate how audacious it is. I do appreciate the music cue. And it's a music cue the Master has clearly thought about. If you do listen to that song, Ra Ra Rasputin, that part of the song does not kick in until over a minute. He's edited that song, which I just think's really funny. When it comes to the other villains in the story, I think that they're a little bit wasted, but they're wasted in a notable way that is almost like a backhanded compliment, because the idea of a Dalek defecting is not new. When the 13th Doctor's like, oh, well, this has never happened before. It has happened in literally her prior incarnation in Into the Dalek. The reason, however, is very different, because the Dalek sees itself as, like, the mission statement has been corrupted. Like, we're meant to be preserving the Khalids, we've mutated, we are Daleks, this is not what was intended for us, so I'm gonna betray the Daleks. That's really cool. I also do like how it is an embodiment of fascism of changing the goalposts all the time. You know, like when TERFs say that they only want to get rid of all the trans people, you know that they're also going to get rid of the gay people next, and then the bisexual people, etc., etc. It was a cool visual to have the 13th Doctor locked in the Dalek casing. That was very cool. But then they are kind of window dressing for the rest of it. I also really liked Ashad in this story. Now, him being cloned and coming back... yeah, that needs a bit more explaining to do, Master. I'm sorry. Like I said, that maybe there was something that was going to happen in Flux or a prequel or something. I don't just want the expanded universe to keep on filling in these gaps. It's going to be so frustrating. I thought that he was a terrific presence. There's that amazing shot. We'll talk about him shortly, but Jamie Magnus Stone directs the absolute hell out of this. I think he might be the MVP of this story, because directing a 90-minute, a feature film that has this many locales and characters and juggling plates, and still making every scene feel visually impactful, is bonkers. Like, there's the scene when Ashad is storming the base and freeing the Master, and there's the one-take shot of him going between those corridors and wiping out the guards and breaking into the prison cell. He didn't need to film it like that, but he did, and it's so impressive. And there's also, like when I mentioned earlier, like, he didn't need to, like, do that much. There's the scene when Kate Stewart is behind the laser grid, and they do that dolly shot between Kate's side and Ashad's side through the laser grid. They didn't need to do that. Like, it could have just been shot reverse shot, and I wouldn't have blamed them at all. I wouldn't have blamed the first AD or the second AD for saying, right, Robin Wenery, who's the DOP, Jamie Magnus Stone, we're running out of shoot days. Can you please make sure you do this Kate and Ashad scene in an afternoon? And they thought, no, we have limited budget and resources, but we're still going to put down this dolly track and we're still going to make this scene visually impactful. Didn't have to. He goes above and beyond. I adored it. Ace going into the TARDIS via the parachute, lovely, but there's so much to talk about. I'm losing track. Stay on target. Ashad, he refers to just the idea of conversion as ascension. And it wasn't until watching the story that I kind of realised what Chris Chibnall is recontextualising the Cybermen as. Because what he did with the Weeping Angels, along with Maxine Alderton in Flux, is recontextualise the Weeping Angels as an allegory of fascism akin to the horrors of World War II, of the Holocaust, which is really fascinating and interesting. But for Ashad, referring to conversion, upgrading as ascension, it's a sci-fi cult. It's a space cult. That's really interesting. However, because there's so much else going on, it's tough. I would rather be complaining that there's not enough for the Cybermen and the Daleks to do because there's that potential on the table, rather than saying, what are the Cybermen and the Daleks doing here? They're not contributing anything. It's tough. But I think, I can't remember who mentioned it. I think it might have been Council of Geeks, and they said, This finale works because it ignores a lot of the Chibnall era, and I absolutely agree with that, because we don't get a resolution to the Timeless Child. It turns out that her leaving the Watch and the Vanquishers inside the TARDIS was the conclusion, that she has the secrets to the past. Oh my goodness, hi Jamie, friend of the live stream. Hi, Jay. Oh, Jamie, while you're here, if you do not mind me asking, I noticed that Annetta Lawfer got a special thanks in the ending of the credits. Are you able to elaborate on, like, did she contribute? Because she directed Eve of the Daleks. Was there, like, a directorial contribution there? Because that would be fascinating. And also, Jamie, if you're able to, I'm aware that you're a busy person and probably are sworn to secrecy on many things. Did you also shoot the David Tennant regeneration at the end, or was that Rachel Talalay or another director? If you are sworn to secrecy, I completely understand, but yeah. And also, we can confirm this is the real Jamie Magnus Stone, director of The Power of the Doctor, joining us on the live stream. Thank you. Hi, chat. Please feel free to show your appreciation to Jamie Magnus Stone in the chat. Hi, mate. Yes, she filled in for me and Paul and shot Paul's lines. He wasn't available the same day as the others. Paul is in Paul McGann. Okay. Also, Annetta Lawfer shot Paul McGann stuff. Wonderful. Oh, I remember there was that leak of David Bradley, Sylvester McCoy, Peter Davison, and Colin Baker staying at like a B&B somewhere, and they kind of hand waved it away as well. They go to a convention nearby or something. Turns out they were filming that. Would explain why Paul McGann wasn't in the picture. Rachel Talalay shot the end, but she absolutely did an amazing job. So I'm just assuming that your contributions to the episode on screen ended with Jodie Whittaker's like last shot and regeneration and everything, and then Talalay takes over for the ending. Yeah, this was from Home House Hotel's Facebook page back in October 2021. David Bradley, Colin Baker, and Sylvester McCoy were there. I'm presuming it might have been for this, but there is no Paul McGann, as you'll note as well. So that checks out that Annetta Lawfer, director of Eve of the Daleks, stepped in on a different time to direct Paul McGann for this sequence. But yeah, Jamie, I did not know you'd be here, but thank you for joining and answering questions. Your work on The Power of the Doctor was absolutely superb. It's like one of the best directed stories in Doctor Who's history, and I do not envy the job of having to direct not only Jodie Whittaker's final appearance in the show, the end of an era, but also it being a 90-minute special on a BBC budget, whilst also towards the tail end of like COVID restrictions, and you were still like wearing masks and contributing to trying to suppress the spread of the virus. Yeah, thanks guys. It was a terrific lunch for Mad Shoot. The cast were amazing, and I loved working with the past companions. Yes, and yeah, working with Sophie Aldred, Janet Fielding, Bonnie Langford, Katie Manning, William Russell, etc. Crabs for Jamie. Macra in chat for Jamie Magnus Stone if you enjoyed his direction. There we go. Look at all these crabs. It's like from the end of the world. I gift you crabs from my chat. James Stone, thanks guys. Haha. Okay, right. Settle down, folks. Settle down. Order in this court. Oh, one last thing, Jamie, if you are sticking around. This was legendary. I put this on the Doctor Who Perfect Shots account, tagged you in it as well on Twitter. This look from the Cybermen and the Daleks. Scripted or unscripted, I've got to know. I've got to know what's with all the crabs. For those of you who might not be so familiar with these live streams, unscripted, love it. Adore everything about it. Absolute Chad. So the crabs in the chat is because Macra in the classic series, Macra do not exist. We love the Macra Terror. We love the story, one of Troughton's best. And we just like crabs in the chat. So we just throw crabs in chat when we appreciate something. If you like something, crabs fill up the chat. This was like trying to explain to my wife last night who Adric is. But we'll talk about we'll talk about classic Doctors. We'll do that. Macra Terror #1 fan. I am the head of the Macra Terror Appreciation Society. Yeah, I put this shot in the Doctor Who Perfect Shots account as well. It's symbolic, obviously. Consciousness would do that. The cliff edge from the subconscious of the Doctor, talking about the prior incarnations that greeted her at that cliff edge. We had David Bradley as the first Doctor. We had Peter Davison as 5, Colin Baker as 6, Sylvester McCoy as 7, and Paul McGann as number 8. And it's so wonderful that Paul McGann does... it's so terrific that Paul McGann's incarnation, the Doctor, does not do robes and has to be different, and 7 just gives him an eye roll. Wonderful stuff. It's such a great way to get the other Doctors included, but also not detract from 13. I think it's a case of like if it was similar to like the end of the Timeless Children, where the fugitive Doctor basically tells the 13th Doctor things that she already knows, that's an issue. But for this, where 13 is carrying the conversation, she wants the reassurance, but she also she's the one who kind of mentions the issue with like the Master being vulnerable after the regeneration. She's carrying the conversation, but the other Doctors are there supporting her and cheering her on. That's the great balance. I think that's why the scene works so well, not just because, oh my goodness, they have classic Doctors in it, and Paul McGann's voice is wonderful. I can wear whatever I want. Paul McGann's, yeah, it's so good. Everyone in that scene is terrific, and Sylvester McCoy rolls the R's for regeneration. Yeah, the man is incomparable. I love him. I love them all so much. But for the other scenes as well, the holographic projection. Yeah, the holographic projection of the Doctor that she uses with the static. I actually liked, on reflection, watching the episode back, how that was implemented. How she does like deliberately static them and then sonic them, but you don't realise like the first time. You just think, oh, something's being set up for later, obviously. But when it comes to like a repeat viewing, you can see the gears in Jodie's head turning as she's deliberately planting these seeds. Very good. Frost Rover 77, the start was so clunky. It's clunky because we just know it's happening, but it's clunky, like, it's justified, A, because of how Jodie plays it, and B, because of how it pays off. You kind of need to notice it. That's why it feels clunky, but I get it. But then the holographic interface starts reacting to Tegan and Ace, and the first time it happens is when Tegan is in the basement with all the Cybermen, and 5 is the one to see her there. And they obviously look very different from when they did before. And she's like, what did you think about, what do you think that I make of all of these Cybermen? What do you think I think of? And the Doctor just sighs and says Adric. And it was, having listened to a lot of 5th Doctor Big Finish over the past few years, Adric gets brought up every 30 minutes. It is kind of like the meme from Jimmy Neutron. Like, oh, here's show and tell. Here's my Adric regret. Yes, but you brought in the Adric regret last week. It is a lot like that, but because it's happening on screen, you can see him visually do it. It's beautiful. So then one scene later, it happens again, but for Ace and the 7th Doctor. And like I mentioned earlier, I like how they did keep it ambiguous as to just what happened between 7 and Ace. And the same thing happened at the end of The Parting of the Ways with the Doctor hologram at the end of that scene, when he says, have a good life, do that for me, was have a fantastic life. But they changed the audio mix, so it sounds like they're in the room and it's not a hologram anymore. And they did the same thing at the end of these 2 scenes with 5, and they did it again with 7, where Ace, all children leave home eventually. The joy is to watch them fly, says the Fall of the 11th. Wonderful quote, wonderful line. I would love like a full 5 or 10 minute scene or flashback or whatever with 7 and Ace, but I also understand that the power of the Doctor is not logistically able to do that, and there's just so much going on. I do think that the main thing holding it back is stuff from the first act, or the first 2 acts, which is kind of like the Chibnall stuff of all these locations. There's a specific and quirky number of things going missing, or satellites or planets, or like distress beacons. Like what was it for the Battle of Ranskoravkolos? Oh, we've got 7 SOS signals, like stuff like that. It just feels like Chibnall's kind of like going into his more autopilot. It does feel like Chibnall autopilot, and it really shouldn't, because it's trying to be the grandiose, it's globe hopping. But I do think when the power of the Doctor cuts through that, it excels, especially with the characterization of Sacha Dhawan's Master, who I adored in this, because Firstly, Rasputin is a vibe, but it is a convoluted setup. But when it comes to him wanting to try and take the Doctor's place, and the scenes he has with Yaz in the TARDIS are genuinely intimidating, and that close-up scene when he's yelling, "I am the Doctor now," and I love the line, chills, when he says to the TARDIS, "I am the Doctor and you will obey me." Great line, love it. But when he does scream in Mandip Gill's face, there's the moment where he clearly is not comfortable in this scenario, and then he gets a bit of like regeneration angst, cosmic angst. He does get some like regeneration pains and everything. But that moment before the pains, there is conflict there in that performance. I don't know if it's on the page, but it's definitely on screen. And when he's kicked out the TARDIS, and he solemnly plays the second Doctor's recorder in that amalgamation Frankenstein Doctor Who costume, with Seven's jacket, with Four's scarf, with the celery. I'm sure that cosplayers and dedicated costume continuity editors will be able to pick apart everything. It feels very bittersweet for him that he's gotten rid of the Doctor, but it does still feel in line with where we lost the Master at the end of The Timeless Children. He has a massive anxiety about where he came from, knowing that his greatest enemy and also pseudo-best friend is quintessential in his origin story, in his origin myth of the Time Lords. And I think that he wants to be the special one. I think that that is a really clever, great building upon of the end of Series 12. And I think Sacha Dhawan maybe spots the subtext and runs with it. And when he is being turned back into Dhawan Master at the end, and he basically pleads, "I don't want to be that me anymore. I don't want to be that." He's a self-loathing Master. And I think that's such a wonderful touch. And it kind of explains why Sacha Dhawan's Master almost looks like he's kind of on the brink of tears, like almost all of the time. Because he has constant existential crises with himself, and he's constantly at war. In Spyfall, when he says, "When I kill someone, like I get a little jolt in my heart, it feels like this is where I'm meant to be." I think he knows that this is his lot in life, and this was his chance to break free from it, but he couldn't because he didn't have the power of the Doctor, which was the friends we made along the way. How he, at the end, as the cyber-converted planet is being destroyed by that creature, is he's alone, and he's in the dirt on the ground, whilst Yaz is able to carry the Doctor away to the TARDIS and with the help of her friends. I think that was quite powerful imagery, and I thought that was really effective. How the Master fails because ultimately he is alone. And the fact that it's not just like in Journey's End, when Luke is just locked in an attic, or Martha and Jack and Rose and Jackie, etc., just wind up behind force fields at the climax of the story. It does feel like all of the companions, even Kate Stewart, are actually actively playing a role. It's one reason why I don't think The Vanquishers entirely works, but I think it involves its ensemble cast significantly better than stuff like Journey's End do. Because ultimately Journey's End comes down to Ten and Donna, and the rest is window dressing. Even though Rose's return was much hyped, everyone was really happy to see Jack and Martha and everyone, and Sarah Jane. They don't ultimately do anything. The only person who does genuinely feel like a side thought in terms of the story is Vinda. But even then, thematically, I'm glad that the returning companions weren't just relegated to the classic series and Kate Stewart. It was something relevant and recent with Vinda. Vinda really should have had more to do, and people have been speculating that was obviously meant to be Jack. I don't know. But I understand maybe wanting somebody more recent to help the Doctor. You don't want everything happening, like, especially if Dan's not there. Like, Dan is gone, like, within the first, 10 minutes of the story. And I'm surprised he didn't have anything to do in, some sort of B-plot. He disappears to go on a date with Di. Di does not appear on screen at all, which does feel like a missed opportunity. But he comes back at the very end for that support group. And I will take issue not issue, that's too strong a word. I have a rebuttal to like Darren Mooney on Twitter, who seems to like consider like the support group at the end like in a really negative connotation. Like, why do they need to be a support group? Like, why can't they just leave the companions in a place where they don't need support? I disagree, because I think support group maybe is too literal a reading. I think it's just a place where these people with common ground. It's a family of shared experiences. For maybe it also depends on my personal reading of it, but sometimes I go to meetups and stuff. There's like meetups.co.uk and stuff, and like writer meetups, and just general meetups and drinks and stuff. And it's not a negative thing. We're not there for a shared trauma. It's not Alcoholics Anonymous or some sort of intervention for a drug or something. It's people with shared common ground chatting with each other and having fun. I don't think it's about trauma. I just think it's about people with a shared experience who have that shared common ground, and they can be friends with each other. As Harry says in the chat, it's like Linda. It is like Linda, except with less music, and Bonnie Langford's there. But Nathan Chu down was wasted. I agree. Logistically, though, I think it's just kind of... John Bishop was able to do Doctor Who Flux because his live gigs were cancelled, and he was able to become part of the furniture there for 6 episodes, because for 8 episodes, I should say, because he did the 2 specials. But when it came to the centenary, that was a relatively late in the game commission. So maybe his contract did not obligate him to be in it for a substantial amount of time. But also, he was able to do live events and stuff like that last year. So when it comes to Yaz, Mandip Gill in this story, I'm not going to address Thasmin too much. I don't really have a stake in it, personally. But I think it was cool that, she's able to fly the TARDIS, but she needs the notepads, and then the Master calls her out on it. That was a really nice touch. Great reactions to Tegan and Ace when Tegan says, "We were you," decades ago. That was really great, like, unspoken stuff. But when it comes to, like, the departure, I didn't really... Apart from just, I have to go because it's the end of the era, so I'm kind of obligated to, because Russ T. Davis maybe doesn't want me. Maybe they should have justified a bit more in the dialogue, in the explicit text about why she decided to leave at the end. I think she does really well in this story. I think this is probably, in terms of pure beginning to end stories, probably Yaz's best outing. But when it comes to... the actual, like, Thasmin stuff, it does feel like they just left an awful lot on the table there. I think that they took the Kingdom Hearts approach to relationships and bonding. They just sit down and eat ice cream, which is apparently a Kingdom Hearts thing. But I think it's sort of like an unspoken, amicable, like, this is where we part ways. I kind of wish that maybe Yaz maybe had more of a say in whether or not she was okay with that. But in terms of her actual involvement in the story proper, before we get to the departure, I liked what she contributed. I think it was kind of criminal to just have Jo Martin do a literal walk-on role. I think she deserves significantly better. And I know we're getting Big Finish stuff in the near future with her. That's cool. But in terms of on-screen, the first person of colour to play the Doctor, the twist appearance in Series 12... in terms of like actual stories, a season and a half ago, and she's just window dressing there. It's cool that she swaggers in the scene, wipes out the Cybermen without lifting a finger, and then they use the regeneration energy. That was like very clever. But in terms of the optics of Jo Martin being in there for like one scene, a literal walk-on role, and nothing else gets expanded upon, don't know. I think she had to be in this story. I just wish it was like, okay, we need to get the Doctor back. What can we do? Oh, there's this other incarnation, I guess. I don't know. But I liked the attention to detail for the continuity that Yaz does not recognize this incarnation of the Doctor. She's like, you were a tour guide, weren't you? Like, I'll explain later. The power of the Doctor is able to work as well as it does, because in the first 2 acts, it does a lot of just go with it. And I think if you are someone who needs the nuts and bolts mechanics to 100% work, interlock, and perfectly align, it's going to be an issue. But I think that if you're somebody who is able to sort of let that, like, not say turn your brain off, because that is negative connotations. And I also think that, that you can still enjoy stuff, like, you can still, like, have, like, a baseline enjoyment even with your brain on. But I think when it comes to letting the the celebratory nature of the event, of it being a regeneration, of it being a 90-minute BBC Centenary special that brings back classic Doctors, classic companions and stuff. If you go into it with the same mindset as like the Five Doctors, I think that's the best way to approach it. I think it is comparable to something like the Five Doctors, like the Day of the Doctor. And in terms of an actual regeneration, I think it is the best regeneration overall story since the parting of the ways. It still has a lot of issues for it. And it also has a lot of loose ends, and I think a lot of that is due to the lead up. That is, like, if you just watch The Power of the Doctor in a vacuum, it's a very solid episode, and then it just starts like blowing the doors open for the third act. But if you see it as a finale to the Chibnall era, it feels like it's the finale to a different era than the one that we actually got. But like I said, maybe that's the meta part of the point, that it's about the endings that you don't quite get, but you kind of have to roll with it and greet that sunset with a smile. And I know that many fans are going to have issue with, oh, there wasn't a proper scene with Seven and Ace. There wasn't a full-blown Thasmin kissy kiss at the end. I completely get that. But I think Chris Chibnall, with the exception of him doing his Chibnall stuff in the first act, 13 seismologists and 15 paintings and Rasputin, all of that, once you get past that, The Power of the Doctor is a very fun, and towards like the last quarter, for me was like a very profound emotional experience. I was emotionally exhausted by the end of it. Not in a bad way. It was just because it was a story, like I said at the beginning, that put into the show what it's felt like to be a fan of this passing of the torch, of this shared collective fandom. There's a reason why, out of all the other things that I love, Doctor Who kind of has a very special place in my heart, and it's because of these cycles of change that as a community we all go through. When like my first Doctor was Christopher Eccleston, but many people's first Doctor will have been way before me. People in the chat were saying their first Doctor was like John Pertwee or Tom Baker. People in the chat as well saying that Matt Smith was their Doctor. Some people saying Jodie was their Doctor, etc., etc. Simon Anthony Hartnell was their Doctor. Blimey, you're gonna love my December marathon coming up then, Simon. I hope I do you proud. But I think this was the first time that sort of collective fandom changing of the guard, that collective experience of moving forward, was put in the text of the show. And I thought it was beautiful. Genuinely beautiful. I thought that the performances towards the end were top tier. I loved Mandip Gill's quivering lips at the end when she silently acknowledges that this is the fate for her Doctor. And I think when it comes to, giving a Doctor like Jodie, who I think hasn't fully met her potential, but went into the show with the mission statement of fair play throughout the universe and helping out where she can and trying to be the positive force for good, I think that this is the finale for that Doctor. Not necessarily the one who we saw in Kablam or Arachnids in the UK and such. I think that the ending scene on that cliff top, and somebody in my Discord, so I think it was Doctor Who fan J, pointed out that it is the same cliff top, CGI'd in, the same cliff top that Ace jumped off at the end of The Curse of Fenric, when she goes through that rebirth, when she learns to lose the anger that she had towards her mother and her upbringing. Whether or not that was an intentional visual callback, who knows? I still think that that's a very nice pattern. And the ending as well, the closing words, blossomiest blossom, which I think was a callback to John Pertwee's regeneration towards the end. Doctor Whoever I'm about to be, tag you're it. I loved as well, one of my favourite shots of the regeneration is when it's the close-up, the almost profile. We go from Jodie's eyes to her lips saying the words, then back up to the eyes, and then she delivers the final line, apparently in one take. Yeah, it was terrific. It was a terrific closing moment. I think so, at least. It was bittersweet in that, yes, she wants more time, she doesn't want to go, but she greeted the regeneration with the sunset, with the smile, and with a playful jab at the future. I adored it.